Good morning. Welcome to the lecture on cryptography, network security, and cyber law, module 4. So, in this module, we are going to study about IEEE 802.11 wireless LAN security, viruses, worms, and other malware firewalls, intrusion prevention and detection, and web service security. So, in this lecture, we will discuss about IEEE 802.11 wireless LAN security. As you have already known, IEEE 802.11 standard refer to a family of specifications developed by IEEE for wireless LAN technology. 802.11 specifies an overall the air interface between a wireless client and a base station or between two wireless clients. Now we'll see how security is provided over here and what's the importance of security. So, first we will see what you mean by wired network. In many organizations, the wired networks is an Ethernet LAN with an existing security infrastructure that makes an authentication server. In many organizations, authentication, authorization, accounting functionality is often provided by a radius that stands for Remote Authentication Dial-in User Service Server. The challenge then is to develop a protocol that seamlessly integrates the wireless LAN with the security infrastructure of the wired network. Uh, so first we will see about different kind of wireless LANs. There are two principal type of WLANs, that is ad hoc networks where stations communicate directly with each other, and the infrastructure WLANs which use an access point, that is AP. So in the infrastructure wireless LANs, a station first sends a frame to an AP and AP then delivers these to the final destination. The destination, it may be another wireless station or it may be a station on the wired network that the AP is connected to. The AP thus serve as a bridge between the wireless LAN and the existing wired network. The figure shows you the infrastructure of wireless LAN. So, a network of wireless stations are associated with an AP access point is refers to as a basic service set or BSS. You can see over here there are set of hosts which are connected by means of an access point. So, together it is called as a BSS, basic service set. The union of basic service set comprises an extended service set which we will call as ESS. Each station and access point in the ESS is uniquely identified by a MAC address which is of 48 bits, and each access point is also identified by a SSID, service set ID, which is a character string of length at most of 32 characters. Now we'll see what happens whenever a host wants to join a wireless LAN, or we'll see what's going to happen when a wireless station is powered up. So whenever a client or a wireless station is powered up, first it need to discover an AP within its range. That is, first it need to identify the access point within its range. So this can be done in two methods. The first one is this can be done by monitoring the wireless medium for a special kind of frame called a beacon, which is periodically broadcasted by the AP. So this beacon usually contain the SSID of the broadcasting AP. So this access point will periodically broadcast a beacon packet, so client can wait for that packet. So this beacon point will always having the SSID of the broadcasting AP. This is the one method. The second method is reverse of this. Here, each station may send a probe request frame which probe for APs within its range. So AP on hearing such request responds with a probe response frame. Like the beacons, the probe response frame contain the SSID of the access point and also information about its capabilities, supported data rates, etc. So a station that wishes to associate with an AP sends it an associate request frame. The AP replies with an associate response frame if it accepts the request for associating with it. To become part of wireless LAN, a station must have to associate it with an AP. At any point in time, a station can associate with only one AP. Authentication and other security functionalities in IEEE 802.11 LANs have seen much evolution in last several years. The earliest protocol that incorporates security in Wi-Fi was WEP, Wired Equivalent Privacy Protocol. This is designed to provide authentication, access control, data integrity and confidentiality, but it failed on all these three counts. The next protocol designed was Wi-Fi Protected Access WPA. WPA was intended to fix the shortcoming of WEP without requiring a new wireless network cards. But WPA is not perfect. It too is susceptible to attacks on its cryptographic algorithm. So, next, all the deficiencies in WEP has been addressed in IEEE 8.2.11i standard. Here 8.2.11i makes sweeping changes in the way authentication, key management, integrity and confidentialities are handled. So next topic is about how authentication will be done in wireless LAN. There are several methods under this. The first one is called as pre-web authentication, free WEP authentication. So early version of 802.11 used a naive approach for authentication. For example, more knowledge of SSID of a station to be authenticated to the AP. However, an attacker could easily snip the value of SSID from frames such as the beacons or probe response and then use it for authentication. So here authentication message is very simple, as you can see. So first the station will send an authentication request and later the access point will send the whether authentication is successful or not. So here this communication will include the SSID of the authentication or access point. So because of which the attacker could easily snip the value of SSID from the frames such as the beacons or probe response. So the another approach was to restrict admission to the wireless LAN by MAC address. The AP here will maintain a list of MAC addresses of stations permitted to join the wireless LAN. Valid MAC address could be obtained by snipping the wireless medium. So here also the attacker can get the MAC address just by snipping the wireless medium. The attacker could then modify his network card to spoof a valid MAC address. So neither of these approaches are truly secure. The next approach is called as authentication in WEP. So in WEP, the station authenticates itself to the access point using a challenge and response protocol. So basically the access point generate a challenge and send it to the station. Then the station will encrypt the challenge and send it to the access point. So here the stream cipher RC4 is used for authentication. So here you can see first station will send an authentication request. In response to this, access point will send a challenge, that is the challenge text. In a response, what station will do is station will encrypt that challenge text and then it will send it back into the access point. How it will be done, we'll see in the next slide. And once it receives that, access point will send either success or failure of the connection verification. So how the challenge response is designed? So here you can see the station will compute a key stream, which is a function of 40-bit shared secret key yes and a 24-bit initialization vector. So here the challenge is XORed with the key stream to create the response. So key stream is computed based upon the secret key and the initialization vector. The response together with initialization vector is sent by the station to the access point. The shared secret key yes is common to all stations authenticated to use the wireless LAN. So here what's the drawback? The drawback is what the attacker need to do is he need to just monitor the challenge and response pair. From this he can compute the key stream. We can see over here he can observe what is challenge which is sent from access point into the station and what's the response that is sent from the station into the access point. So once if he get values of these two, then he can compute what is key stream. So to authenticate himself to the access point, he need to XOR the challenge from the access point with the computed key stream. So it may also be possible for the attacker to obtain yes itself. By eavesdropping on several challenge response pair between access point and various stations, an attacker could launch a dictionary attack and he can eventually obtain the value of secret key yes. The next is about authentication and key agreement in 802.11i. So 802.11i uses a protocol that supports authentication at the link layer. Three entities are involved in this, that is the first one is supplicant, the wireless station, the authenticator, the AP in our case, that is the access point. The third one is authentication server. The generic authentication message in IEEE 802.11i is shown as in this particular figure. So here the protocol used between the station and the AP is EAP. EAP stands for Extensible Authentication Protocol. But that used between AP and the authentication server depends upon the specification of the latter. So here what protocol used may be different than this one. For example, the authentication server is often a radius server. For here you can see radius server, which is used its own message type and format. So here radius stands for Remote Authentication Dial-in User Service. It is a client server protocol used for authentication, authorization and for accounting. The main authentication methods supported by EAP Extensible Authentication Protocol include the following, that is EAP MD5, EAP TLS, EAP TTLC and EAP PAP. So first one is EAP MD5. So this is the most basic of EAP authentication method. Here the authentication server challenges the station to transmit the MD5 hash of the user password. So here you can see, after initial request identification, request and response, the access point will send a EAP challenge request. So the what the station will do is, it will prompt the user to type his or her password. it it is then going to calculate the hash of the password and send it this across the link to the authentication server. That is, here you can see response is calculated using MD5 on ID, password and challenge string, and it is sent to the access point. Based upon this, either the connection will be successful or fail. The next one is called as EAP TLC. It is based upon SSL and TLS protocol. It is more secure and provide mutual authentication agreement on the master session key. It requires the AP as well as the user to have a digital certificate. So here both access point and the station both will have a digital certification which is used for authentication. It is relatively straightforward to equip each AP with a digital certificate and a corresponding private key, but extending this PKI to each user of the wireless LAN may be a tedious job, or it may not be feasible. The next one is EAP TTLS or tunneled TLS. It requires certificate only at the AP end. The AP authenticates itself to the station and both sides construct a secure channel between them. Here this is the secure channel what it is shown. Over this secure channel, the station will authenticate itself to the AP. So the station could transmit attribute values like username, password over this secured tunnel. The next one is called as protected EAP. This was proposed by Microsoft, Cisco and RSA Security. It is very similar to EAP TTLS. Here the secure tunnel is used to start a second EAP exchange wherein the station authenticates itself to the authentication server. The enhanced security offered by all these does, however, come at a steep price in the performance measured by the message and computational overhead incurred during the authentication. Now we will look about the keys used for authentication. We will look at the key hierarchy used in authentication. There are two types of keys used in wireless LANs. The first are pairwise keys used to protect traffic between a station and an AP. The second type of key is the group key, intended to protect broadcast or multicast traffic between an AP and multiple stations. The key hierarchy is as follows. The root of the key hierarchy is a pairwise master key called as PMK. This is obtained in one of the two ways. The first method is the station and the authentication server may agree on a master session key as part of the authentication procedure. The authentication server communicates this key to AP. The AP and station then derive PMK from master session key. The other approach to derive pairwise master key is a fresh PMK for each session is the pre-shared key PSK, which is used as the PMK. So we are going to compute a fresh PMK for each session is the pre-shared key PSK, which is used as PMK. So now we'll see how the pairwise transient key is derived. The 256-bit PMK, which we have seen previously, is used to derive a 384-bit pairwise transient key called as PTK. The PTK is a pseudo-random function of PMK. That is, PTK can be calculated as PRF. PRF stands for pseudo-random function of PMK, along with that noun of AP, nouns of station, MAC address of AP, MAC address of station. We'll see this one later. So, three 128-bit chunks are extracted from this 384-bit PTK for the following purpose. So, from the 384-bit PTK, again 3 more keys are derived. The first key is a temporal key. TK is used for both encryption and integrity protection of the data between the AP and the station. A key confirmation key, KCK, it is used basically for integrity protection, which is supported by a MAC computed as function of the message and KCK. A key encryption key, KEK, is used to encrypt the message containing the group key. So these figures show how these different keys are derived. You can see PMK, that is pairwise master key, is derived from master session key, one method. The other one is it can be derived from pre-shared key. Then from this PMK, the PTK is derived. So we have seen PTK is of 384 bits. This PTK pairwise transient key is derived. From these remaining 3 keys, each which is of 128 bit, that is temporal key, key confirmation key, key encryption keys are derived. So here basically this KCK, key confirmation key, it is used in 4-way handshaking. So we'll see about the messages comprised in this 4-way handshaking procedure. So here first AP sends a nonce NA to the station. This station itself, it will chooses a nonce NS. The station compute the PTK as it is pseudo-random function of PMK and the nonce selected by the AP, nonce selected by the station, and MAC address of A and MAC address of the station. So that is this particular value. Here basically PTK is a pseudo-random function of PMK, the MAC address of the station, and AP, and nonces contributed by the station and the AP. The two nonces help prevent reply attack. Here three 128-bit keys TK, KCK and KEK are extracted from this 384-bit PTK, what we will calculate as part of message 2. The station sends its nonce together with its choice of cipher suit to the AP. It uses the KCK to compute message integrity check. Such protection avoid a possible man in the middle attack. So that is the second message. On receiving the message containing NS, the AP computes the PTK from the above expression, what we have discussed, and used by the station. It then extracts TK, KCK and KEK. In addition, the AP verified the integrity and source of message 2 using the key KCK. The message 3, what we are saying, it is from AP to the station that contain the current group transition key GTK. This is the key used by the AP and all the station to integrity protect. The message 3 also contain the cipher suit chosen by the AP. The message is encrypted using KEK and integrity is protected using KCK. The last message, message 4, is an acknowledgement from station that it has received the previous messages without error. It is a signal to the AP that henceforth all the messages will be integrity protected and encrypted using TK. This is the same explanation what we have seen. The next one is we'll see about confidentiality and integrity. So here first we need to study about how and why WEP failed to protect the desired level of security. We will then see about how 802.11i provide message confidentiality and integrity. So first we will see about data protection in WEP. So WEP was basically designed to provide message confidentiality, integrity, access control, but it is failed in all three aspects. In this section, first we will see about how plaintext can be recovered and messages can be modified due to flawed design decisions in WEP. I will see about WEP encryption and integrity checking. WEP uses the stream cipher RC4 for encrypting the messages. It generates a pseudo-random key stream KS, which is a function of static secret key shared between the two communicating parties. In order to have key stream vary from message to message, a random per message initialization vector IV is also used to generate the key stream. Early implementation of WEP used a 40-bit secret key S concatenated with a 24-bit initialization vector to create in effect a 64-bit key. So here KS keystream is XORed with the plain text to obtain the ciphertext C. So here you can see ciphertext is derived from XORing the plain text P with the keystream, which is calculated as a function of secret key and initialization vector. And we can see over here, we can get back the plain text by XORing ciphertext with the keystream. The plain text P that also include the message to be sent and also an integrity check. So here you can see a 32-bit CRC is computed on the message that is shown over here. So here WEP frame consists of the encrypted plain text along with the MAC header, initialization vector and the encrypted CRC. Now we'll see how known plain text attack can be performed on WEP. The first problem with WEP is the possibility of keystream reuse. Since the initialization vector is 24-bit length, there are only 2 to the power 24 distinct keystreams that could be constructed on the given secret key. Yes. Suppose an attacker finds two frames which were encrypted using the same initialization vector. Let their ciphertext will be C and C dash. Let the corresponding plain text be P and P dash. Then it follows like this. You can see P is XORed with P dash, which is equivalent to C XORed with C dash. Or you can calculate P dash just by XORing P is XORed with C XORed with C dash. So here once if the attacker comes to know about C, C dash and P, he can easily perform the known plain text attack. The next problem with WEP is message modification. Just consider an attacker who wishes to modify a message sent by a legitimate user. Let the sender's plain text be M1F M2. So here M1F M2 are binary strings. So this is sender's plain text. The attacker wishes to substitute the substring F with another substring F dash, so that the decrypted message seen by the receiver is M1 F dash M2. The attacker does not need to know the value m1 and m2. However, he can assume that he knows f and f dash. However, we assume that he knows f and f dash. Ideally, the message integrity check should detect any modification to an existing message. Can the attacker modify the message in such a way so that the modification is undetected at the receiver end? Just consider this example. For the above plain text, the ciphertext computed by the sender is, that is, you can see this is the message m1f m2, which is odd with the CRC value, CRC which is calculated on m1f m2, which is XORed with the key stream value. So the attacker intercept the ciphertext and perform the following operation. So he can first construct the string O to the power mod m1 is odd with f XOR f dash, odd with O to the power mod m2. So hence here O to the power m1 is a string of mod m1 zeros, where mod x is the length of the substring x. Hence, then he can compute the CRC on the string, that is using this particular formula. Then he will finally XOR the original ciphertext with, original ciphertext is this one, this with these values. So here the last step follows from the fact that CRC is a linear operation, that is CRC calculated on m1 XORed with m2 is equivalent to CRC of m1 XORed with CRC of m2. The receiver, on decrypting the ciphertext, he can obtain m1 f dash m2 odd with CRC of m1 f dash m2. So here the modified message has a valid CRC, and so it will pass us the integrity check at the receiver. Hence the receiver accepts the message unaware that it has been modified by the attacker. Next we'll see how data protection is provided in TKIP and CCMP. So the technical name for Wi-Fi protection access is Temporal Key Integrity Protocol, TKIP. The RC4 encryption key is basically used to generate the RC4 key stream. One of the most serious flaw in this web was the way in which RC4 key itself was created. Here, web encryption key is generated by simple concatenation of 24-bit initialization vector with 40-bit shared key to provide a 64-bit key. The problem is that the variable part of the web key is too small, so the per frame key stream repeat very frequently. The TKIP generates a random and a different encryption key for each frame sent. The encryption key in TKIP is 128 bits. So TKIP generate a random and different encryption key for each frame sent. It employs a process called as two-phase mixing for this. The input to this process are 128-bit temporal key TK computed as part of the four-way handshake. The sender's MAC address and the four most significant bytes of 48-bit frame sequence counter. You can see over here it will use TK temporal key, sender's MAC address, and four most significant bytes of the sequence counter. PRF is nothing but a pseudo random function. The randomizing capability of the key mixing function and the large size of the key space virtually guarantee that key stream collision will never occur. Thus, known plaintext attack that could be successfully launched on web has no chance of success with TKIP. So here the sequence counter is incremented for each frame sent. It is also carried in the header of each frame. It is extracted by the receiver and used to compute RC4 key for decryption. So both sender and receiver keep track of sequence number of the last frame sent or received. The receiver accepts a fresh frame only if the frame sequence number is greater than the previous frame received from the same sender. So this helps the receiver from reply attacks. So basically this figure will show two phases used in generating RC4 key. So here two pseudo-random functions PRF1 and PRF2 are employed in two phases. The least significant 16 bits of the sequence counter are input to the pseudo-random function 2. So the output of PRF2 changes for each frame sent. The 32 most significant bit of the sequence numbers are input to the PRF1. The input changes after every 2 to the power 16, that is 65,536 frames sent. Hence what we can conclude is PRF1 is executed very rarely and overall computation time is saved. So one of the most serious vulnerability in web was the use of CRC checksum as an integrity check. The 64-bit message integrity check in TKIP is also called as MIC, or it is called as MIC, is of greater importance. So here MIC is non-linear and it can be calculated as MIC of M1 XORed with M2 is not always equivalent to MIC of M1 XORed with MIC of M2. You can compare this with CRC. So MIC is computed as a function of the data in the frame and also some fields in the MAC header such as the source and destination address. It also uses a input key derived from PTK which are computed during the four-way handshake procedure. The next one is CCMP. The implementation of 802.11i that uses AES is referred to as WPA2. Its technical name is Counter Mode with CBC MAC Protocol CCMP. In CCMP terminology, this count is referred to as a packet number PN. So here, as in the case of TKIP, a 48-bit sequence number is initialized when a session is started between the sender and receiver. In CCMP terminology, this counter is called as packet number or PN. This count is maintained at both sender and receiver ends. The PN is included in a special CCMP header field in the CCMP frame. The PN is incremented by the sender after each frame is sent. Upon receiving of the fresh frame in that session, the receiver compares the value of PN in the CCM header versus the value stored by it. If the former is less than the stored value, the frame is likely to be a replayed frame and hence it will be discarded. The first task in preparing frame for transmission is to compute the value of MIC. So here you can see the first step what we will consider, it is the computation of MIC. The MIC is computed using AES in cipher block chaining mode with block size 128 bits. The initialization vector for the MIC computation is a nonce which include the 48-bit PN stand for packet number. The second and third blocks used in MIC computation are specific fields in the frame header, such as the MAC address, sequence control, and frame tag. Next, the blocks in the frame data are sequentially processed, resulting in a 8-byte MIC. That is, you can see here this part. Here, the temporal key is used for encryption, first with the initialization vector. This value is XORed with AAD, stand for additional authentication data 1 and data 2, then with the given plain text P1, P2 up to Pn to generate the MIC. The next step is encryption. The frame data and MICs are concatenated and then encrypted using AES in counter mode. So if you consider n be the total number of blocks in the frame body plus MIC, the procedure for encryption, you can see, you can compute AI, or in general A1, A2 up to AN, or in general you can calculate AI as encryption using TK on counter. Here counter is nothing but our packet number. That is, you can consider it is as Pn plus I into J, where Pn is a packet number and J is a constant known to both sender and receiver. So for each packet you can calculate that value of AI. To compute ith block of ciphertext, what we are going to do is we are going to XOR AI with PI. So here you can see A1 is XORed with P1 to calculate C1. In general, it is AI XORed with PI, where PI is ith block of the plain text. The frames now include two new fields, the CCMP header and MIC. Upon reception of this frame, the receiver reversed the operation performed by the sender. It performed decryption followed by the MIC verification.